psychic astronauts and telecontacts with other extraterrestrial civilizations. The emptiness of Fermi's paradox, which asks, where is everybody? Meaning, where are all the extraterrestrials? The emptiness of Fermi's paradox as an argument against the extraterrestrials is based, in my opinion, says the author, on the fact that technological advanced civilizations would be unlikely to ever be able to explore or colonize the universe. And here I proposed that the dispersal of the aliens and our own descendants, human or engineered, into space would be via von Neumann launchers that would collect a potentially infinite amount of information for use and exploitation back home. But there are other non-incompatible possibilities that if we are open-minded enough, we can also consider. Granted, these odds are based on a series of very big ifs, but they're worth and fun to ponder. One of those ifs, which actually seems to be less and less controversial these days, is ESP, extrasensory perception, or supersensory perception. As outrageous as it may seem to incorrigible skeptics, and I admit it did not sit well with me either until I began to pay serious attention to the relevant literature. There's ample experimental evidence, in addition to the abundant testimony of psychonauts and mystics from time immemorial, that knowledge can indeed transcend the obvious limitations of matter, space, and time. According to some serious thinkers in the field like Russell Targ and Dean Radin, consciousness is non-local. For example, CIA-funded research at the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, in the 1970s and 80s showed that distance is no barrier to gifted visionaries. We're talking about remote viewing as well, right? The experiments conducted at SRI by Targ and Hal Puthoff clearly indicates that the psi phenomena do not obey the inverse square law like electromagnetic radiation or any other known forces of physics. Skilled remote viewers can actually see targets on the other side of the planet or inside an electromagnetically isolated chamber as easily as they can see something inside a sealed envelope in the same room. Can you imagine? According to former congressional aide interviewed by Vikram Jayanti for a fascinating new BBC documentary on Uri Geller's espionage work for CIA and other intelligence agencies, the investigation popularized by Targ and Puthoff and Project Stargate continues today in the form of Black Ops, and interestingly, it has faded into obscurity not because it was scandalous to establishment science, but because it clashed at the fundamental Christian theology of some high up in the field defense in the 1980s and 90s. One wonders if decades later, this in-the-dark research in remote vision, remote viewing, is still limited to terrestrial targets. Pat Price, the principal remote viewer on Targ and Puthoff's research at SRI, commented that they were potentially ubiquitous in space and time, and it's well known that the annals of remote viewing that psychic Ingo Swann, while at SRI, saw Jupiter's rings before they were discovered by Pioneer 10 probe, in the form of structures on the moon, similar to those supposedly photographed by the Apollo missions, and used as arguments by various websites on the subject of space phenomena. Regardless of whether Swann was accurate in his later observations of the moon, he appears to have been the first to seriously attempt psychic astronautics in the modern era, although earlier mystics such as Emanuel Swedenborg claimed to have visited other worlds and contacted their inhabitants. Imagine a room full of well-trained Ingo Swanns given the coordinates of one of the habitable extraterrestrials orbiting the star Gliese 667c. Everyone gets the same coordinates, and from their collective insights, we get a rough average about the planet's topographical features or interesting biology, if any. Then psychics turn their attention to the next set of coordinates, eventually creating a rough map of the entire planet. Then they move on to the next planet, and so on. Could this be the future of space exploration? Are such plans already being carried out in secret by government agencies or NASA itself? And by extension, could there be a parapsychic space program to find extraterrestrials hidden behind many close contacts? Alien psychics? Contact with extraterrestrials or whatever often has a parapsychic component as well, something Jacques Vallée always stressed, that foreign intelligence interacts parapsychic runes with people in their common motif in both science fiction and comics, as Jeffrey Kripal has shown in his book Mutants and Mystics, and as Christopher Loring Knowles has described in the extremely interesting blog The Secret Sun. There's also a vast, eerily similar body of literature on experiences with ayahuasca, psilocybin, and other DMT-based entheogens. Users of these substances constantly come into contact with alien entities that resemble those familiar to us from UFO literature and or enter a world teeming with extraterrestrial intelligence. DMT researcher Rick Strassman has claimed that the similarity of DMT experiences to alien abductions may not be coincidental. The facile, prevailing materialist position is that, of course, it is not coincidental. It's all in the mind of the substance user or contact, but Strassman himself remains open-minded that reality may be something far more interesting and complex, that intelligences may be authentic, and that DMT allows access to the mental realm where these intelligences reside, or the wavelength through which it attempts to interact with us. Abduction experiences with and without the use of substances at least suggest that there is a possibility that extraterrestrial psychic astronauts are visiting us in the comfort of our living rooms, from the comfort of their own living rooms, via some form of cosmic mental superhighway, which may be the mind of the mysticism of the Gnostics and Hermetists or the Akasa of Theosophy. Psilocybin prophet Terence McKenna, who regularly came into contact with mechanical elves, and whose 1971 Amazon experience vividly foreshadowed many of the cognitive patterns and insights of Philip K. Dick, would certainly agree with the idea. He suggested that Stropharia cubensis mushrooms might be a blueprint for alien colonization, with the spores traveling through space and creating nodes in what we might now call the astral internet. Think non-locally and act deeply. The concept of a non-local universe has also been called a holographic universe, because every tiny piece of hologram contains a hologram itself within it. Parapsychic experiences are scientific, though die-hard skeptics will always call it pseudoscientific idiom for describing experiences of a world that in other places and times has been called sacred or mystical. There is always considerable overlap between these telepathic abilities and other apparently more intense experiences, such as astral projection or exobody, out-of-body experience. As far as I know, the latter phenomena are less scientifically documented, aside from the controversial literature on near-death experiences, but are equally well attested by thousands of years of anecdotal accounts from yogis, shamans, and ordinary charismatic people. Theosophical tradition refers to travel on the astral plane, although it's quite possible that such experiences are actually something akin to lucid dreams, and that the dreamer misinterprets the experience in terms of real space. Nevertheless, in a non-local universe, this distinction does not affect whether such alternate states of consciousness and others, such as hypnagogia, that is, hypnotism, provide access to factual information about distant places or events that have not yet occurred. Perhaps a future theory of non-local mental physics will have to abandon spatial terms like plane altogether, because in such a world or dimension, space and time have no meaning. Even the word dimension is problematic because it implies extent and measurement like the other dimensions that we are familiar with. Non-local consciousness is often explained by quantum entanglement, the spectral action at a distance whereby entangled particles somehow share information lightning fast over great distances, much faster than the speed of light, that is, from one end of the universe to the other. It has been suggested that the brain itself is a quantum computer, and that the real action takes place at the subneuronal level in microtubules within the neurons that are narrow enough for a quantum phenomena to occur. Another perhaps compatible explanation I would prefer would be the Buddhist one, that awareness is a fundamental field or subsoil of existence, and that natural laws depend on it, not the other way around. Therefore, our material brains and sense organs are a kind of filter, or as the philosopher Henry Bergson put it, a restrictive valve of consciousness and not its generators. However, if non-locality is reality, then all points in space and time potentially coincide in consciousness. Every point, the ones in space and time, are just as close to each other, just as here and perceiving things that are far away in space or time may simply require a shift or retuning of consciousness, just as we change the frequency on the radio receiver. The problem now is locating the desired information. In fact, Jacques Vallée himself, in the analogy of how information is located and made accessible in databases, gave Ingo Swann the idea of using an arbitrary geographical coordinate system, which became central to the coordinated vision from Macrothem Protocol, CRV. The material journey, what is certain is that if a well-trained or highly evolved psychic astronaut could mentally interact with places far away in space, some standing obstacles to spaceflight would be resolved. There would be also new and very interesting consequences. Psychic astronautics may help survey a distant location, but simple psychic travel a la Swann or a la Swedenborg does not satisfy the human need to go somewhere in person, to walk on the surface of a distant world, to feel it underfoot, to see it with our own eyes and to smell the air, to interact with the animals and plants, and perhaps to engage with its intelligent beings or on their own terms. Indeed, immediate, tangible information is needed in order to feed back the psychic's insights. Farsightedness requires confirmation. This limitation, actual material interaction, would be the critical weak point in a full-scale parapsychic exploration of the universe. Or maybe not. Is there a way for non-local consciousness to materially interact with a distant location? First, the possibility of telekinesis from far afar is supported by limited but compelling accounts of exploits by Swann, Geller, and others in the SRI studies, as well as alleged exploits of parapsychic spies, including Geller, who we now know was employed by the CIA and other intelligence services, not only for remote viewing, but also to cause damage to enemy electronic equipment and magnetic disks, according to Jayanti's documentary and accompanying book by Jonathan Margolis. If such things are indeed possible, then we cannot easily dismiss the feats of yogis and other Eastern mystics, for example, the creation of tulpas, or feats describing the OBJ and astral projection literature. And those who experience out-of-body experiences have described other people seeing them and interacting, even sexually, with them. In the same vein, some extraterrestrial contacts look like interactions with immaterial ectoplasmic astral projection entities, suggesting that this may be the mode of space travel of alien explorers, again assuming they are from other worlds. But if such an interaction is possible, then it would make no difference when, where, or where it originates. Grabbing the wheel. However, the big if we consider the possibility of a psychic connection between humans and aliens, then we are forced to consider other possibilities, namely that a parapsychic astronaut enters the physical body of a being on the target planet and takes control of it. If minds at this location can be interacted with, communicated with, or telepathically manipulated, then they are likely to be carriers or containers of the non-local consciousness of a materially distant traveler. Surely any shaman would agree with this possibility. The idea of spirit possession has a long history in many cultures. I can't imagine such a possibility being considered in a modern laboratory. However, if telepathy exists, then it is theoretically possible for a well-trained or highly evolved psychic to not only project ideas into a target or directly manipulate their behavior, hence through altering perception or introducing life-changing experiences, for example, Vallée's idea of control system, but literally sitting in the driver's seat. Who knows what technical requirements are needed to be able to enable a consciousness or to materially inhabit a new, different body. Perhaps this is a barrier that only more advanced beings can overcome, or perhaps there is some trick that human psychics will eventually discover and manage to teach their colleagues. Perhaps our secret psychic astronauts will discover the trick by adapting techniques from the Tibetan Book of the Dead to locate and enter a new fetus, in other words, hack the cosmic reincarnation system to make it work for adults. Even if advanced psychic astronauts cannot exactly affect possession of an alien species like our boss, then they could manipulate their contactees into doing the necessary physical work of creating an entity to act as a host. Such a plan might involve a long-term breeding program or otherwise a construction of bio-droids to see where they go, you can see where this is going. From the point of view of a hypothetical observer on the destination planet, of course, actual contactees would probably not understand what was going on, or perhaps on a need-to-know basis, such as a plan would unfold over hundreds, thousands, or even millions of years, if we imagine, as many authors have done, that our species or even the Earth's biosphere is being manipulated with the ultimate goal of extraterrestrial colonization. But remember, non-locality applies to time as well as space. This means that the alien plan to cultivate our civilization to be the required biological and bio-android substrate for their physical embodiment would take no time at all from the perspective of the alien psychic astronaut. A single alien astronaut could visit and interact with humans at different times, encouraging alpha or beta mating, etc., all in just a day's work, so to speak. In other words, we need not imagine ancient immortal minds with infinite patience engaged in such a scheme. It could just be mortal beings in flesh and blood like our boss, but just with enhanced psychic powers. Parapsychic parties? Both of the scenarios I mentioned, direct possession of native organisms acting as hosts or manipulating them to breed or construct avatars, seem to fit themes such as close contact and alien abduction in the related literature, including the obsession with breeding and hybridization. In fact, it would make sense any aspect of literature that led Mac Tonnies to propose a crypto origin for UFOs, such as the fact that UFO technologies like airship, flying saucers, etc., sometimes look uncannily like ours, but always only a couple of generations more advanced than officially available technology. If alien souls move among us in specially bred bodies and fly technologically created here and there with their own specifications by secret human contractors, then their technology will be limited by what can be achieved locally, even though the ideas behind it may be more advanced. And this could explain why flying saucers sometimes crash. Sometimes I'm sure a spacecraft sent by an advanced civilization from the other side of the universe wouldn't do such a thing. Such a history of human extraterrestrial contracting on behalf of extraterrestrial clients would go back centuries and even millennia to ancient Egypt or Sumeria, for example, and amount to a long-term version of Richard Dolan's breakaway civilization theory. Dolan has suggested that the U.S. government is not where it used to be in terms of knowledge about UFOs, that most of the information has been leaked to the private sector. Who knows what kind of complicated relationship the Army sector secret contractors and their guild counterparts have had in the past with extraterrestrials or local contactees. Perhaps these secret parties or guilds are and always have been the real players shaping our foreign future? If this is the case, then there's little hope of getting answers from them about the reality of UFOs through the eternally expected declassification, since the Constitution does not hold private companies accountable to the public. There are hints from those in the know that the UFO problem is linked to the paranormal, and one of the juiciest comes from a high-ranking military contractor. In 1993, while dying of cancer, Ben Rich, former director of Lockheed Skunk Works, reportedly sensationalized a guest engineering graduate lecture at UCLA by saying that, quote, "we already have the technology to send ET back home," end quote. As Rich left the room, Jan Harzen, now head of MUFON, chased after him to ask him further questions. He said, "I'm really interested in the propulsion you mentioned that can take us to the stars. Can you tell me how it works?" According to Harzen, Rich stopped and cryptically asked Harzen if he knew how ESP worked. Taken aback, Harzen replied, I accept all that points in space. And in the time they are interconnected. And Rich replied, "Yeah, that's how it works." Materialists might speculate that if the story is true, then Rich meant that there is some kind of quantum technology for material vehicles capable of teleporting through space, or else the use of exotic materials with negative mass capable of traveling at near light speeds, ignoring the local inertial frame, as John Mike suggests in his book, The Anatomy of Flying a Saucer. In his lecture, Rich pointed out that the answer lay in some errors that had been discovered in the physical equations and implied that his carrier was building UFOs, so perhaps that was what it meant. But if the question of UFO propulsion is slightly different from the question of non-locality, what if interstellar travel is accomplished through parapsychic contact with the goal of creating a biological and material infrastructure through the exploitation of local subcontractors? If local subcontractors like Lockheed are building flying machines today, not only on behalf of our government, but on behalf of extraterrestrial beings who communicate through psychic or even locally bred hybrids, men in black or grays, for a more conventional physical interaction with us or with the planet. An argument against the extraterrestrial hypothesis for UFOs or even against the SETI project is a problem of the extreme asynchrony in terms of technology and society of civilizations in the galaxy. Simply put, it is extremely unlikely that two civilizations will coincide time so that they are simultaneously at the same technological, social, and cultural level. Recently, George Dvorsky applied new numbers to the Drake equation and found that there are currently 5 civilizations currently in our galaxy, and that makes any contact with anyone anywhere near our own technological level extremely unlikely. But again, since non-locality implies that distance in both time and space is annihilated, parapsychic astronauts potentially open the door to interaction with other intelligences throughout the universe throughout its lifetime. If aliens can astral travel through space, then they can also travel through time, and we know there is no difference between the two. So the aliens, again, if that's what they are, that humans come into contact with, maybe from our distant past or similarly our distant future, as well as our present. Some may come from the actual dawn civilizations that emerged when the universe cooled enough to support life as we know it, those that mathematical models say should have colonized the galaxy long ago. Well, they may have colonized it in a sense, perhaps they did and still do, but not materially and in a slow from our point of view, but fast from theirs. Why that way, that depends on the emergence of technological civilizations locally, which they will make machines and bodies on their behalf. If we actually visited the homeworld of these ancient parapsychic astronauts today, we might find their civilization, even their planet and star, dead. Yet they may still appear in space and time, tending to venture beyond billions of years ago. Perhaps it's these distant transhuman non-rational, non-parapsychic technological descendants of these civilizations who visit us in common four-dimensional space in the form of von Neumann Waldisters, or who knows, maybe these pods provide, among other things, the information the alien psychics need back on their home planet. However, when we multiply the number of possible civilizations that have appeared and will appear by the possibilities of spatial and temporal non-locality, the strange diversity and absurd inconsistency of UFO encounters begins to seem somewhat more reasonable, and even the Drake equation loses its meaning. Terence McKenna once suggested that when we eventually travel to other planets, we'll probably need less power than a pocket battery if psychic powers exist and can be developed to the extent that the yogis always assured us, and the if is a very big but also very interesting one, then our ticket to the stars is these powers and not spaceships that will carry the material, our mortal body. One day, Earth's psychic interstellar explorers may see today's solar sails, Bussard thrusters, and Alcubierre power ships, that's warp drive, as we see the flying corkscrews designed by Leonardo da Vinci. And this I've translated from a Greek article. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.